Thank you all for coming to my session. My name's Alane Boyd. I'm with NodeGurus.com. So what we do is we work with employers from all around the world to post Node.js jobs. So we're definitely just trying to connect more opportunities for Node developers with employers. We also have a company called GoFanbase. We create mobile apps for marketing for other businesses to use. We also have a couple of different web platforms for just creating marketing databases. So I work with developers all day, every day, hiring them, going through the process. So whenever I applied here, wanted to talk about some of the things I see from a hiring perspective and working with software developers. So what is killing your $100,000 job salary opportunity? And it could be whatever number it is. Maybe you want to be making more than $100,000 a year or whatever it might be. Some of the things that I see a lot is because you're a software developer, they should hire me. I saw Node.js on Twitter posted that there are now 5 million other Node.js developers out there. So competition is getting even bigger. So you may not be the only people applying for the same position. So how can you stand against somebody else that's applying? Of course, though, there are more companies out there that are starting to look for those specific software developers. I've noticed this a lot. They're not able to, when we're interviewing somebody, they don't know what projects that they've worked on. I see a couple of people nodding their heads. And I really want you to challenge yourself in this because a lot of times, and I find myself, I do the same thing is, oh, I'm not one of those people. I don't do that. To really think about what you might be doing, running into, that may be keeping you from it. Really have an open mind and think, maybe I am doing that. So review what you've done before you go into an interview. Look at what projects you've worked on, how the team was, were you working individually, were you putting together the structure, what part did you play in each of those projects? Another one that I run into way too often is not having code samples that you can send to the employer. Sending them even up front whenever you apply is a huge leap ahead of what other people are doing. A lot of times what the interviewer will say, or interviewee will say is, everything I've ever done is proprietary of the company I was working for. There's never been a single project that you've worked on just by yourself that interested you, that you just kind of dabbled in on the side. There's nothing there that says, this is the kind of code I'm writing, this is projects that I'm interested in. So I want to talk about David here. This was a software developer that we hired. He wasn't actually at the level that we wanted to hire for. He was a little bit more beginner. But when he applied, and we kind of just brushed him off whenever he actually came into our office and dropped off his resume. And we kind of brushed it off until we looked further into what he brought with him for the application. He was a self-taught developer. He only had, like I said, he only had some basic knowledge. He wasn't really at the skill level we needed. But in his application, he described how he self-taught himself. He submitted code samples. And he also submitted kind of a story about, how I said where he described how he self-taught himself, but how he developed his own project to learn the code, learn the frameworks, and sent a URL along with it for us to check out what he did. And that was it blew our mind because that was way far ahead what most people do when they apply for a job. And probably most times, you feel like you may not need that. Again, you might only be competing against a few other people that are applying. But this gentleman also, when we hired him, we gave him, of course, a beginner salary. But within 6 months, we gave him 3 raises to where he was making what we would have paid a skilled, higher level software developer. So, a couple of key pieces there. Have some fun. You're a software developer. You can build anything. Why restrict yourself to just what a company's doing? Go out there and have fun. Explore something so that whenever you do apply, you have something to show for what people are, what kind of software developer you are. Something that we look for in the code. Are you a neat developer? Do you have typos? Because typos mean that you have a lot of bugs. You would be surprised. Can you backtrack on your work? Do you set up any testing so that it automatically tests what you're doing? Do you have anything like that? So, think about the code. Don't just slop something together. Think about what you're putting together and really put your best impression in front of the employers. So whenever you do get the interview, because you did such a great application with your code samples, maybe a project that you worked on by yourself or with a couple of other team members, you get into the interview. You don't have to be the most charismatic person in the room whenever you go in there. Bringing those projects that you've worked on, discussing if you were a part of a team or working individually on something. Sometimes companies are small. You might only be the single developer working on something. Other times you might be with a team of 20 people. Where did you fit in on that team structure if there was a team that you were working with? If you were the single developer on a project, there was no one that you were working with, how did you come up with the structure you were doing? Who did you communicate with? How did you like working by yourself on things? A lot of times with developers, we do need somebody that can think outside of the box. Even if you are on the lower end of the development team, somebody that can put together some new ideas. A lot of times the ideas may come from the CEO or somebody higher up where they're just like, you're a developer, put it together. They're not sure how it's going to work. They may not even have the best ideas because you know how the software can work. You know what's available in the different platforms to be able to execute something. And the CEO or the company coming together with the ideas, they may not always have the best plan. That's where we really rely on a software developer to tell us where and what can be done and make it even better looking. And I mentioned this before too, is having fun with your application. They don't have to be boring. They don't have to be just like everybody else's application where you list your job stuff. Because you are a software developer and you can create things, show us what you created. So top 5 things that employers need. Developers that can think. Don't be a robot. Don't just plug yourself in and just hold your head down and plug away every single day. If you can think outside of the box and you have ideas to contribute, that's really where you're going to be able to move up above that entry level or wherever it is that you are moving up at the company. Efficient use of time. You can kind of get down rabbit holes sometimes whenever you're developing. You got to really make sure that, and from an employer standpoint is, can you stay focused on what you're doing? We had one developer that wanted to keep going back and refactoring his software or his code, which is great. There's definitely a time and place, but not on a weekly basis, and we needed to plan for it. So, kind of think about what you're doing, and the employer, they're paying for the software developer to get the job done. So there's definitely a line there of being focused, but also coming to them with, hey, there's a better way, a more efficient way to do this. How about we take some time in the next 30 days to refactor this part? Suggest better ways to get to the end result. And this kind of goes back to don't be a robot is, you're going to know better a lot of times on how things can be done. Make that suggestion. As an employer that works with software developers every day, I want to just give them a hug when they come up with a better way to do something. Or they're like, Alane, that's not even a good idea. Let's not do that. Developers that can communicate with front-end developers. I know that you're really cool because you're a great software developer and you're doing the back end, you're working maybe with some database stuff and you're really cool, but a lot of times we find a disconnect between that front-end developer doing the UX, UI, and that back-end developer. So know just a little bit, just so that you can communicate with them. It makes it a lot easier. The front-end developers, they're very limited a lot of times on what they know. Of course, there's better ones out there, but having that little bit of knowledge behind you, and when you go into that interview saying, I can communicate with them, I have this experience, even if it's just with your own project doing something, having that behind you makes it so much easier and makes you very desirable to an employer. Developers that check their work and run tests. Don't just leave it. and wait for the bug to happen. Go and test through your work. Set up tests ahead of time. Because when you go down and you're working on several different things, I mean, our developers are jumping in and out of projects all day because different things come up, different priorities happen. So, you know, a lot of times we have a plan in place, but then something happens. So having those tests up front will definitely save you time and a lot of frustration in the end, having those set up. So the employer, knowing that ahead of time, would be very happy to know that. Knowing the fundamentals. I know you're excited to be a developer. Fundamentals seem like a waste of time because you know how to do all these cool things. But this kind of goes back to the testing, knowing just the basics of things. We've hired some really high-level skilled developers, but when it comes to the fundamentals, there are definitely some gaps there. And we've had to backtrack and have them set up some of the fundamentals themselves so that they could connect with some of the lower-end developers or not have so many bugs in their code, whatever it might be. A lot of developers, they want to get to the quickest path to create the project because that's the fun part. They don't want to waste time on the little things. So taking your time, building it right. Don't just go, our CEO, he was a software developer in his past life, and he was one of these developers. Well, then it was a quick path forward in that instance, but as we added more functionality to the software, we ran into a lot of issues with the code and trying to build on top of it, so we'd have to go back and fix that code part. So don't always just try to do a shortcut. Really think about the structure you're building because a lot of times, like I said, things change. How many projects have you worked on where the end result was a little bit different than what you were beginning to code? And sometimes there's some ADD in place with companies where they have one idea and then they want to switch and they want to do this. So if you build it starting the path the right way the first time, save you a lot of headaches in the end. And I worked with somebody a while back that said, you know what, I got to be honest up front because you always catch me. Because if I'm not doing it right, it's going to come in the end, whether it's through a bug or through having to take more time on a project than it should, I'm going to get caught. So just keep that in mind. If you're trying to shortcut yourself or you're trying to go through just what you think would be a quicker process without having to do all the code that should be there, that eventually it's probably going to work its way out. And you don't want to have that on your hands. This one's one of my favorite ones. Don't oversell yourself. So whenever I talked about David at the beginning of the presentation is you always want to have great expectations of yourself and definitely have confidence. But if you're honest up front, you know, with David, the developer that we hired, he didn't have all the skills that we needed, but based off of how he applied, the interview with him on how he structures his code, how he does things, we knew he'd be able to pick up on things fast, so that didn't hold him back. Same thing can be for you. Don't set high expectations with the employer and telling them that you're able to do all of these things and you may have been able to pass all the tests the employer threw at you, but you may be having somebody helping you outside of it. And like I said, you always get caught. They'll always figure it out most of the time. So I've got Brad here. We started to notice we have a time tracking software so that we can see how much time is spent on different projects or where we may need some efficiencies. And this is with all of our employees, not just software development. And we noticed that there were some gaps, that things weren't what he said he could do. The expectations, they weren't there. He wasn't able to keep up with the development team like he had said he could. So I started looking at the time tracking software, and it just so happens to also take little screenshots. And I noticed he was Skyping with his sister. His sister was a very highly skilled software developer and also the language that we had. So he was getting her to help him throughout the day on when he couldn't figure things out, which is why it was taking so much longer. We still work with him. We told him he had so many days to figure it out because we'd already invested a lot of time in him. And at least he had his sister to count on whenever he needed help. But if you set those expectations up front, be honest with the employer. If he would have said, I'm not as skilled as you need, but I can learn and I can learn quickly, and I'll spend my time getting up to speed on what I need to, that most likely would have been fine up front. But there comes a time where this instance we might have let him go in a different situation or a different employer that ran into this. So, think about where you are as a developer. And when you apply, set the expectations so that the employer knows exactly where you are and what level you are. Kind of goes along with the same thing. Be realistic. Don't think where you are on the software development team or what kind of software developer you are. A lot of times, company culture is the biggest piece of it. The software developers we find, we like ones that are self-taught because they go in, they figure things out. If they don't, there's a certain curiosity we find with them too. They like to explore and learn things. So that's definitely kind of our company culture. We do have other ones that have gotten their degrees and definitely have that structure and that formality to programming that you also need. But if you find a company culture that you like, that is going to be the best fit for you. Don't always go for the company that might have a huge development team where you get to be a part of it. A lot of times the startups, the smaller companies, you get to learn a lot. You're going to be thrown in a ton of different situations, but that may not be what you're interested in. So think about that company culture, think about what you're looking for as a career, and kind of go after those types of jobs, or narrowing down the companies that when you are interviewing, it might be something a little bit less of a salary, but you're going to be able to stay there long term because you are happier working for them. Do your research ahead of time whenever you are applying for a position. If you get that interview, going in, and I know that y'all have heard this a lot, look at the employer, but actually look at what they're doing because you're going to be a part of their software team. So if they have a sign up to check, where you can download the software, download the app on your phone or sign up for it online, go ahead and do it. Run through so you can see how it works. See if it's even something that you would want to work on, because if it looks like a boring project that doesn't interest you, how often are you going to want to go in and program 8 or more hours a day? You're never going to want to. It's not fun then. So check it out. And then we've even had recently where developers are coming in with some ideas on making it better, improving it. It doesn't have to be mind-blowing. It doesn't have to be some huge epiphany that you throw at them. But, hey, I noticed that. So I'll give you an example. Our mobile app has a thank you screen at the end after the user runs through it. And instead of, after a few seconds, it just going away and taking you back to the beginning, the person has to click next. Seems really dumb that we never figured it out just to have it disappear after a few seconds. But we were talking with a software developer, and he said, why are you doing it that way? That's a very front-end thing. That's not a huge, back-end thing, but I'm just using that as an example. Coming up with an idea to help make it better, you're going to be way ahead of what other people are, other applicants for the same position, and really being able to get the salary that you want. So whatever salary requirement you have in your head or the goal that you have in your head, thinking about these things, getting closer to your goal. So do what you say you can do. When you go into an interview, set the expectations right for yourself and for the employer. You are going to move up. You are going to get higher raises, or you're going to be, the employer's going to be so blown away by your application and your interview, by what you have to bring to the table, that you're going to get the salary that you request. Read and stay relevant with technology. Node developers, I found, are very current in what's going on. It is an exciting newer language or framework that people are starting to really grab onto. So, but find out, read a little bit more about how different technologies tie in, do different things. Don't just go home at the end of the day and live in your little world, because technology keeps changing. I know you know this, but sometimes just hearing it helps you realize, maybe I should do a little bit more of it. And employers need and want thinkers. They need people like you to come up with ideas on doing things. They can come up with these ideas all day long. Like I said, I will tell a developer, well, you're a developer, just make it. Well, it doesn't always happen that way. But you know what it's capable of. You know what you can do with the software or with the technology. So bringing that to the table, letting them know this is what you can do. Any questions? I have a microphone. I can walk down to you. I saw you shaking your head and smiling a lot. Do you find yourself doing those things, or? Yeah. Thank you. So this is just a quick little thing about NodeGurus. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's just a job listing site where employers that have Node jobs that they're hiring for get posted here. It's just specifically for Node developers. So you can follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, hello@nodegurus.com if you ever have a question or need anything. I have some little cards up here. Looks exactly the same. So if you want to take one of these, I'm happy to hand it to you. No questions? All right, thank you all. I hope it was helpful.